Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the ever-changing world of technology? Tech It Out can help make some sense of it all. Breaking down geek speak into street speak, technology columnist, author, and TV personality Mark Saltzman covers consumer technology each week for every listener. Mark tackles the latest news, reviews, and how-tos to help you understand what's hot, what's not, and why.
Hey everyone, welcome to Tech It Out. It's episode 379 for the beginning of February. Big week in the tech world last week, mostly because of the DeepSeek AI story. If you've been following that, it launched by a Chinese company that turned US stocks upside down, especially companies tied to AI, like NVIDIA. What is said to be the world's most valuable company, $3 trillion. Well, a little less because it lost almost 600 billion, wiped off its market value in a single day early last week. Ouch. But has rebounded a little once issues were unveiled tied to DeepSeek. So if you're not familiar with this is, it's a generative AI platform. So it's like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, where you type in a prompt, like a question, or you give it a command like, tell me what to do in Barcelona for 3 days on a limited budget kind of thing, or write a business proposal about this. How do I respond to an email like this? So just like other Gen AI platforms, it's meant to be conversational and help you personally and professionally. It can write code and much more. The reason why a lot of the US tech stocks were hit is because DeepSeek can be used for a fraction of the price compared to those other platforms by enterprise companies, big companies. It's still free for folks like you and me who just wants to download it to your iPhone or Android device, but it costs a fraction to make and is considerably less to use on a world stage. So that can seriously make an impact on other big players. And it seems to work about as well. I've put it through the ringer this last week, but it looks like some of the damage done to tech stocks on this side of the pond, it's rebounded a bit because DeepSeek seems to be a privacy concern on a few levels. For one, as you likely know, any Chinese-based company must hand over data to their government should they be asked to do so. So that's not going to sit well for many, knowing that your information, especially if you're asking questions or typing in information about yourself or your company, is in this platform, DeepSeek. What is being done with that data? You'll never know, right? So that's an issue right away. Could be a national security issue. The second problem is also tied to privacy. Can others see your information? Well, the answer seems to be yes. There was a breach, or more than one breach this past week alone, perhaps no coincidence, where millions of prompts, again, that's what you type in when you ask a question or give it a command, was revealed on these breaches. So people's names and their questions and all that, their information. So not a good start for this company, even though it's promising and hey, I'm all for competition, but we're going to see how the dust settles this coming week. Anyhow, speaking of privacy and security, we have a great show planned for you today. With Valentine's Day coming up, it's a timely chat to look at romance scams that tend to bubble up, especially this time of year. And so Visa will join us off the top of the show to chat about staying safe, cyber safe, what to look out for with these scams, and how to protect yourself. And speaking of cyber safety, after Visa, also on the show this week, we're going to catch up with McAfee, one of the biggest names in this space, to talk about the findings from a new report that they commissioned called the Scamiverse, and what you need to know about that. And so we'll focus on staying protected digitally in 2025 on this week's Tech It Out. But as you know, if you are a longtime listener of this program, it's all in a language you can understand. I break down geek speak into street speak, and I'll make sure that my guests do so as well. So let's officially kick off a fresh Tech It Out episode with our first interview. Valentine's Day is coming soon, of course, so it's an ideal time to discuss the threat of romance scams. They happen all year round, actually, but can especially rear its ugly head around February 14th for the Hallmark holiday, as love might be on the brain of many. Unfortunately, these cybercriminals are not looking for a partner, but rather it's an attempt to part you and your money. Joining us to explain how romance scams work and how you can fight back, we've got on the line Dan Munson. He's director on the Global Fraud Investigation Team at Visa, a company that has invested billions into fighting fraud over the years. Welcome to the show, Dan, for the first time. Good to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's great to be here.
So why don't we jump right in, Dan? I want to be respectful of your time. What are romance scams exactly? I hinted at them off the top. And where do they come from?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. And it's actually more complex than it would seem. They can be varied in a lot of ways, but generally a scammer is engaging with a victim and essentially they're trying to initiate a romantic relationship with that victim. As far as where they're coming from, now that we kind of operate in this online world, it really comes from anywhere. So I wouldn't say we really see a heavy nexus in any one location or geography or anything like that. It's all online. These actors are spread out, and typically they're going to engage through that online environment. So things like, chat rooms, forums, dating websites. And really what ends up happening is they initiate, these relationships, these conversations. And at the end, their ultimate goal is to get that victim to transfer funds, to transfer money, or to make a payment, or, gain some type of monetary value from that victim.
And just to clarify, Dan, you mentioned the word actors. Yes, they are actors because they're acting like they love the person. But when you say actors, you are likely referring to bad actors. It's a synonym for cybercriminals in the fraud world. So I just want to clarify for our audience, these are people who aren't who they say they are online. So they are actors in another way.
Yes,
right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Mark. Yeah. Threat actors.
And so you've talked to us about these will often come through dating sites or on social media. So it's not unusual then to get like a direct message. Like usually this is not a public thing. If someone posted publicly to my, for example, Facebook page, it's something private that you would get. Could it also be text message, email, a phone call, all the above?
All the above, absolutely. And that's really what makes it difficult is they're going to try and get your attention and engage in a conversation however they can. So it's text. It is your Facebook page. There's nothing preventing them from commenting on a photo and trying to initiate the conversation that way. It's through dating apps. It's text, phone calls. It's all of the above, certainly.
You actually brought up a good point that if someone looks at your Facebook profile, they may be able to discern that you are single. Because if you're happily married, for example, then you're going to shut that down right away. If your spidey sense doesn't already tell you this is a scam, someone may, or even use AI to determine whether someone is single or not in order to increase their chances of duping you.
Absolutely. Yeah. These scammers, these threat actors are very good at what we call reconnaissance. So really understanding their victim. These romance scams are very targeted. So they're absolutely looking at your social media. They're looking at your online presence and trying to figure out how can I craft, this lure, this conversation so that it really resonates with the victims. And social media, online presence is a very big part of that.
So with that in mind, what are some of the red flags for this scam? How are they trying to lure you into a phony relationship in order to get money from you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think the biggest red flag that we see with romance scams, especially from kind of that fraud perspective, is the request for money, right? There's going to be something within the conversation. Once they build that relationship, they're going to ask the victim to send money. A lot of the time it'll be, on the premise of some tragedy that they've experienced, or they have a family member that is sick, right? And they've got a lot of bills that they're responsible for. They're just trying to help out their sick family member. So, please send me money so I can help them. That's certainly a big red flag within, the romance scams and just kind of the dating environment generally. So if you're being asked for that type of, funds transfer or some type of money request, that's certainly a red flag for. So things like, scammers saying they're in a distant location and they can't meet up physically, right? So that kind of hesitation to meet up in the real world, offline, face to face, or if that relationship is very fast moving and you're just noticing that they're initiating conversation more aggressively and it just moves faster than what you would anticipate for, a legitimate relationship. Other things like, avoidance of video calls, or if there's a pressure to commit to them within the relationship, even requests if you meet them on one dating platform and they're requesting you to move to another dating platform or to another kind of chat mechanism, that can be a red flag as well.
Those are all great red flags to look out for. Makes sense. I know one listener of this radio show wrote me a few months ago to say that they fell for one of these romance scams. And it was someone who said they lived in another country, and the scam was to send them money to buy a plane ticket to see them. And she did. She said to me, I was going to say, look, let me buy you the ticket. But he was insistent that sending him the money was better and he would be able to get a better rate and all that. And then, of course, you're ghosted after that. And speaking of which, I don't know if you have stats at Visa on how prevalent romance scams are, but there's probably a good swath of victims who don't report it because they're embarrassed that they fell for it.
Yeah, we do our best to collect that type of data and those metrics internally. We certainly have less visibility than, say, McAfee or some of the other folks I think you're talking to who have more kind of that infrastructure visibility. We're certainly confined to kind of the transaction side within Visa for most of this.
With that in mind, how are romance scams different from the other types of fraud that Visa is seeing?
Yeah, they're similar in a lot of ways, especially when, in that case, you brought up a really good one, the scammer is saying, hey, buy me a ticket, a ticket or transfer the funds or whatever it is. Sometimes they'll prompt that over, a credit or debit payment, right? Or they'll say, hey, they've got some infrastructure set up that they can actually take those payments themselves. And we see that from a Visa perspective, where it looks very kind of typical fraud on the transaction side. And especially as we're moving more into kind of the peer-to-peer and money movement, which Visa plays a significant role in, we see more of that activity as well. And that's, a lot of that is playing out in the scam space.
But how are romance scams different than other kinds of scams? I'm going to have our guest answer that when we return. You are listening to Tech It Out. We've got on the line Visa's Dan Munson, director on the Global Fraud Investigation team. So stick with us. A lot more Tech It Out coming right up after this short break.
Listen to Tech It Out whenever you want. Find the Tech It Out podcast at iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Tech It Out. We are chatting with Dan Munson. He's director on the Global Fraud Investigation team at Visa. Again, a company that has invested, I think it's north of $10 billion into fighting fraud over the past few years. Before the break, Dan, you were about to explain what separates romance scams from others. I mean, if the end goal is the same, to part you and your money, how are these really any different? So please continue your thought.
Great question. The difference with romance scams really is how targeted they are. I would say that's a key differentiator is they're going to do their reconnaissance and do their homework on the victims. And, they're going to get a very compelling narrative in front of those victims. They're going to know, where you live. They're going to know what your interests are. They're going to, know your preferences about what you're looking for in a partner and that kind of thing. So it is very targeted and much more targeted than, say, someone trying to steal your credit card or, pickpocket you or put a skimmer on a gas pump or ATM, right? That's kind of just capturing whoever stumbles upon that. Whereas the romance scams are very targeted against their victims.
And love is blind. So unfortunately, people fall for this during the courting process. They're enamored by the person. So what are some of the ways then, Dan, people can be sure that they're speaking with who they think they are on dating apps or across social media sites? I guess it's the opposite of the red flags. Like if they're willing to put their face out there, they don't ask you for money.
Yeah, absolutely. It is difficult. It is one of those things where you're going to have to put in the work to make sure you know who you're talking to. There are some things that individuals can do, do the due diligence and do that research. And these scammers are going to conduct that type of reconnaissance on you. We should really be doing the same thing when we're engaging in these online relationships. So look at social media, look at things like inconsistencies with what this person is telling you, in your kind of romantic conversations compared to what they're posting publicly on social media, or, do they have a website, for their professional brand or anything like that. So, make sure you're kind of cross-referencing what you're being told in the platform and make sure you can find that type of social media presence and online presence. And if you can't, that in of itself can be a red flag, right? And have those conversations with the individual that you're engaging with. Don't be afraid of asking those questions. One of the best things I think people can do is be open about it with your friends and family. If you're engaging in, a relationship that has some of these red flags and you just need a second opinion, go to a trusted contact, go to a family member or, a loved one, just say, hey, here's the situation I'm dealing with. Is there anything that you find is suspicious about this? And just having that kind of second set of eyes, that objective perspective here that isn't wrapped up in the emotions of a new and blossoming relationship can be really helpful in getting you to, see the risks and see those red flags.
Great advice. Before I let you go, Dan, what can someone do if they think they've been a victim? Earlier, you were referring to anybody contacted as a victim, but that's only if you send money, right? I mean, let's be clear. It's if you shut it down, you're fine if you don't give any money, as long as you wake up and realize that it's not legit. But let's say you are a victim. You actually do send someone money and then they're gone. What happens next?
Luckily, there are a lot of resources. So I would say first and foremost, if, this was a funds transfer or, a credit debit payment or anything like that, contact your bank. Let your bank know, put aside any of the hesitation and embarrassment. I've almost fallen for these scams. I've gotten very close and these actors are getting very sophisticated. So there shouldn't be any type of embarrassment, Be open about it, report this to your bank first. If that doesn't work and you're kind of at a loss for next steps from your bank, you can report this to the government. So there is the IC3, it's the Internet Crime Complaint Center. IC3.gov has resources specifically for romance scams where you can report these scams to the IC3. FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has reporting mechanisms as well. And you can actually go to reportfraud.ftc.gov and report this to them as well. So there are quite a few different avenues and mechanisms to report this, which is the good news here.
And then finally, is there anything else that you want to make sure our audience knows about romance scams ahead of Valentine's Day?
Yeah, I think just keeping in mind, all of these red flags and best practices we've talked about here. You mentioned earlier, Mark, Valentine's Day is a good lure, right? These actors are very opportunistic and they capitalize on, the emotions. If you're single and you're looking for a partner, Valentine's Day can feel lonely. It's a very good opportunity for actors to get a hold of you and convince you that, they're what you're looking for. And they know that and they're going to capitalize on it. So I would say, just be especially vigilant during the Valentine's period and really any holiday period. These actors are opportunistic and they're going to capitalize on, the emotions around these holidays.
Great. And then finally, the website I usually plug when I'm interviewing someone from Visa about staying cyber aware and cyber safe is visa.com/security. Is that still the best URL you'd recommend for people to check out tips and articles and blog posts and all that?
Yes, absolutely. That is a great one.
Okay. Visa.com/security. Our guest has been Dan Munson, director on the global fraud investigation team at the company. Thank you so much for carving out the time to chat, especially ahead of Valentine's Day. Very useful information. Thanks again, Dan. Looking forward to having you on the show another time.
Of course, Mark. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Great to talk with you and hope everyone stays safe out there.
Hey, for full transparency, I want to acknowledge Visa is an official partner on Tech It Out. They have been for the last couple of years. They're awesome to work with. And little did I know that they had so much to say about topics unrelated to shopping. Obviously, it ties in with transactions and scams and fraud and all that. So a shout out to them and thank you. Wanted to be fully transparent with y'all. And speaking of cybersecurity, don't forget we're going to continue that thread when we return on Tech It Out. We're going to catch up with McAfee. We're going to talk about their report called the Scamiverse. Who's most at risk? How much are we losing? What are we doing wrong? How is AI impacting scams? And so a lot more Tech It Out to get to when we return after this short break. We'll be right back.
Want to follow Mark? Google him. Mark with a C and Saltzman with a Z. Breaking down geek speak into street speak. This is Tech It Out. Tech It Out with technology columnist, author, and TV personality Mark Saltzman.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Tech It Out. McAfee has just published results of its latest report, dubbed the Scamiverse. about all the ways scammers are trying to get at you and your wallet in 2025, and how AI is helping the cybercriminals up their game. Joining me to chat about this topic and what you need to know to fight back is Steve Grobman, Chief Technical Officer at McAfee. Welcome back to the show, Steve. Good to talk to you again.
Hey, thanks, Mark. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and great job this morning, by the way. You fielded questions from journalists around the world, if I'm not mistaken, on that Teams call tied to the Scamiverse, which we're going to chat about. And you did a really good job. Perfect for this show, breaking down geek speak into street speak, because cybersecurity can make your head spin. And the irony is, how do we protect ourselves if we don't understand all the jargon? But you did a really good job making sense of it. Before we talk about the Scamiverse, which is a great name, by the way, tell us a bit about McAfee. You guys have been a leading cybersecurity software company for decades now.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And McAfee is now 100% focused on protecting the digital lives of consumers. So while McAfee has been around for decades, we're constantly evolving. We're constantly focused on developing new technology to protect consumers against the threats that are most prevalent. So while a lot of people think of McAfee as an antivirus company, we still do a great job at that. We're actually number one in the industry from both an efficacy and performance perspective, but we're also putting a lot of our research and development into some of the newer threats. A lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is all about how do we defend consumers from the scams that are becoming so prevalent in our environment.
So it's not just about software, as I'm looking at my McAfee Ultimate Family window right now, but also in education and arming consumers and businesses and other organizations with information to fight back as well. It's not always software, because I guess they call it social engineering, where we could be tricked into thinking that someone who is emailing us, texting us, or calling us, or DMing us on social media is the real deal, when in fact they're not, they're scammers. But that can often get past software. So I'm glad that your organization has broadened your MO, if you will, to protect consumers at all levels. And I think that's a good segue into the Scamiverse report that you commissioned. Tell us what that means exactly. What did you set out to find?
What we really wanted to understand with the next level of quantitative detail is how are consumers at the end level getting impacted and exposed to scams. McAfee is constantly studying the state of the art for what scams we can see in our labs. We have everything from what we call honeypot accounts, where we're working to try to make sure that scams that are occurring in the wild are things that we're able to get a hold of, see, analyze, take apart. We have telemetry from our various products that give us an indication of how prevalent certain things that we're aware of are. But what we really wanted to do is have a study that talked to a representative set of consumers and basically ask them the question, how are they getting impacted by scams? And what we found was somewhat alarming, but unfortunately not that surprising. We found that about 2/3 of consumers have either been involved in falling victim for a scam or knowing someone personally that has been. And in those cases, more than half the time, it's for really a substantial amount of money, in the order of $1,000 or more.
Wow.
We also found that consumers really need to be on their guard continuously. The average number of scams that consumers are exposed to in a day is 12. So if you think about, bad things flying at you from all angles, really around the clock when you're living your digital life, whether it's coming from your email or from your text messages or from your social engagement, or now having to be aware that when you're watching video or looking at images online, that a lot of that content can be created with AI, what we call a deepfake. You need to be really aware that some of this clearly can be for good purposes, but a lot of it is trying to help create an environment that is what we call a scam. And, you're now living in the Scamiverse, as the report was called. And what we're doing is we're working to both educate consumers on what to look for, how to make sure they're not falling victim to scams, but also arming them with the next generation of technology. I'll definitely chat in today's discussion a bit about some of the great things that we're building to help consumers really identify when they're being exposed to a scam and have the right tools.
All right. So yeah, before we talk about how to fight back, which definitely is needed here, that would be remiss not to talk about that. But tell us a bit more, please, about AI helping these scammers, these deep fake videos. They look legit and they're getting increasingly realistic. You were talking this morning, for example, during your press event, one batch of deep fake videos or photos are over the top ridiculous. So you already know that they're not real. Like, I think your example was Trump and Biden riding unicorns and fighting with it. Like, it was something silly because it was so ridiculous that it's not real. But obviously that's just to show what the technology can do. It's the more subtle or more realistic videos that could convince someone that it's someone it is not.
You're spot on. So if we think about generative AI for creating things like images or video, a lot of it is not malicious. So some of it is used for parody. Some of it is used for creativity. There's a whole segment that is generating artificial intelligence-based art. All of that's fine. The challenge becomes when generative AI is being used to create something that looks indiscernible from reality, and the end consumer is not able to tell, is it real or fake? And the paradox that we're in is it's getting harder and harder, and I'd say almost impossible for consumers to be able to tell the difference between a real image and an AI-generated image, while at the same time, it's becoming easier and easier for bad actors to create both images and video that are more and more real. So easier for the bad guys, harder for all the good consumers of the world to defend themselves. And that's where we're focused on trying to educate as well as provide the best technology. But you're spot on.
What a thrill to have Steve Grobman, CTO, Chief Technical Officer of McAfee, on Tech It Out. When we return, he's going to continue his examples of AI being used. So stay tuned for that. We'll be right back.
Breaking down geek speak into street speak. Tech It Out, hosted by Mark Saltzman.
Welcome back to Tech It Out. We are chatting with Steve Grobman, CTO at McAfee. We're learning all about its Scamiverse findings, what it is, how people are falling for scams. We've also discussed differences in demographics and how AI is aiding these scammers. Before the break, Steve, you were giving us an example of something that most people would know is AI, something ridiculous, and how when it's more subtle, obviously it's harder to detect. So please elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think the example I gave this morning was, you have two presidents riding unicycles.
Oh, unicycle. I said unicorns.
Unicorns would probably be just as good as well. But, if you saw that image, your natural instinct would be, it's not real. Whereas if you had an image of one of those politicians talking to a world leader, like that might be something that would be very believable. And if context around it was set up to make a point, a normal consumer wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Did that really happen or not, without doing things like fact checking?
And that's where I was going to ask you about the scam part. If you can give an example, a real one or a made up one, of how a deepfake video can actually dupe someone into spending money.
Yeah, so one of the most common scams that we see with deepfake video is what we call a fake investment scam. Typically, it's a form of crypto scam where a high-profile individual, very often it's a tech legend, a Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Sometimes it's more of a celebrity, but they're basically giving a pitch that there's a new technology that is using artificial intelligence or quantum computing that allows you to invest money with a much greater rate of return than has ever been available. And it's only going to be lucrative if you're one of the first investors. So the point being, they're creating this sense of urgency that if you want to hit it big, you have to depart with your money right now. They'll basically set up all the mechanics of how to convert real money into cryptocurrency and then move it into what essentially is a fraudulent investment platform. The victims of these scams never get their money back. There's some nuance and sometimes some creativity. We've even seen cases where sometimes they'll let a victim take a little bit of money out in order to gain additional credibility that it's not a scam, to encourage them to put much more in. And that's when they close the trapdoor and basically vanish. It's one example. There are many others. We see generative AI being used in a lot of romance scams. You can think of a romance scam as a victim believes that they're involved in a close relationship with somebody online. Generative AI is often used to both create images that can be sent from the scammer to the victim.
Yeah, we talked with Visa just before you, Steve, about romance scams and how AI was making the problem even worse. So yeah, thank you for that.
That was one of the things that we studied in this analysis. We found that the younger demographic was able to very quickly identify that a scam was in progress, typically under 30 minutes, whereas the 55 and older demographic would a lot of times not know they'd been scammed until there was some secondary indicator, like they got a credit card bill, they got a bank statement, and they were able to put the pieces together that they've actually been taken advantage of and funds have been depleted. We're really trying to understand not only the mechanics of how these scams occur, but the aftermath to really educate folks to be hyper aware. And if they're suspicious of something, we've tried to give guidance.
And before we talk fighting back, and you've already hinted at some things we can do, Steve, I'm sure AI is more than just deep fakes, right? Isn't artificial intelligence also helping scammers better write or target like highly personalized attacks on people by, scrubbing their social media profile and knowing certain things about them? Like AI is also helping in that respect, unfortunately, correct?
100%. And a few key points on that. Some of the advice that consumers might have heard a few years ago no longer applies. You might have heard that a good way to detect a scam is if the grammar's not right or if they see spelling errors. The scammers don't have grammar and spelling errors anymore. Right. Everybody is using large language models, generative AI to write their scams. And to your personalization point, it's not only about the pieces that consumers have intentionally put in the public domain. There's been a lot of data breaches over the last year or two, which provides tremendous fuel for creating personalized scams to individuals. So if you think about the data that's in these data breaches, it's things such as who are your family members? Where did you previously work? Where do you currently work? Where do you live? And all of that can be crafted into a note that adds credibility. You can think of, you used to work for a company and you get an email that says, hey, you might remember me. I'm Bob. We work together at XYZ company. I hear that you're going to be in town. And, even if you don't remember that person, like the fact that there's so much credible information that is accurate, it adds authenticity to the email and you start to trust it. And if they put something like, I'm looking for a job and, check out my profile. When we got together last, I took some amazing pictures, things that can kind of take you into the next phase of the scam.
Yeah. Great point, and scary times indeed. A little bit more with Steve Grobman from McAfee, Chief Technical Officer, when we return on Tech It Out.
Follow Mark Saltzman on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Listen to Tech It Out whenever you want.
A couple minutes left with Steve Grobman, CTO of McAfee, to talk to us about its latest report, the Scamiverse. You've already given us, Steve, some great ideas to fight back, but let's dive a little bit deeper if we can before I let you go. What can regular consumers do? I'm sure cybersecurity tools like what McAfee provides helps.
So there's three things that are important for consumers to think about. Number one, if you get something that you want to either act on or is going to change the way you think about the world, fact check it. There's so much disinformation, especially on social media platforms, as moderation policies are evolving, that if you see something inflammatory, it's really important before you like it, forward it, repost it, just make sure it's real. With the LA wildfires, horrific what's been going on the last couple of weeks, we saw social media posts that showed things like the Los Angeles Hollywood Hills with the Hollywood sign in flames. And in some of these posts, they got over 1 million views, lots of engagement. We analyzed them with our advanced deepfake detection technology, 100% false. Similarly, if you went out and looked at them from credible news organizations, 100% false. So make sure you fact check. Number two, take a step back. If you get an email, a text, a direct message that's alarming, recognize that creating a sense of urgency is one of the key tools that scammers use. So if it looks like it's a government agency that says there's going to be a law enforcement action against you, or a bank that says, your money has been withdrawn, like all of these things are tactics the scammers know will cause you to act very quickly. And it's important that you take a step back, breathe, and really look at all of the information in the communication. And then if you're still concerned, reach out to the organization through an independent contact channel. Call the number on the back of your credit card, go to the direct statement or website for your bank. Don't click on a link that's in the communication. If it's a government or law enforcement agency, look up their contact information directly and contact them. Those are the key things. And then finally, use the latest and greatest technology to help you stay one step ahead.
How about technology? How can software help as well? I know it's not the be-all, end-all, but how can McAfee help from a filtering, if you will, or flagging standpoint?
So we're introducing some brand new technology that's directly focused on this problem of combating scams, helping users detect things that they can't really detect easily with their own eyes and ears. So deepfakes that we've talked a lot about. We introduced a technology last year called Deepfake Detector that helps flag AI-generated videos for users. We're expanding this to work for all of our customers on a much wider variety of hardware. Initially, it was only possible to run this technology on AI PCs with specialized AI hardware. We're now expanding that to be able to have a much broader scope. We're also going to be launching for our customers technology that detects scams in both text and email. We know that text and email remains one of the primary communication channels that the scammers use. And our text scam detection will help detect text messages that are really scams. And similarly, our email scam detection will help customers detect scams when they come through email.
All right. And where can we learn more about that, Steve, as we wrap up? What's the best website?
So we've actually set up a dedicated site that's all about artificial intelligence, how it can be used to defend users, but also about how it's being used by bad actors. It's www.macafee.ai. And if listeners want to learn more about McAfee's products and all of our great offerings, it's www.macafee.com.
All right. Steve Grobman, Chief Technical Officer at McAfee. All right. McAfee.ai, and that's MCAFEE. Thanks again, Steve. Always great chatting with you. Thank you for this insightful conversation. Very helpful. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, Mark.
And thank you for tuning in to the program this week. It was a very cybersecurity focused one, first with Visa on romance scams, and then the Scamiverse with McAfee. On a related note, don't forget to properly back up your important files on a regular basis, just in case something happens to your PC. I always trust SanDisk and Western Digital external drives. They can hold massive amounts of data without breaking the bank. Very trustworthy. Don't have to pay for a monthly cloud subscription either. WesternDigital.com has more, or SanDisk.com. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. A fantastic week ahead, and I look forward to catching up with you next weekend for another brand new episode of Tech It Out. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye for now.